Welcome to another episode of Inside the 12. This is where we keep you up to date on all things Big 12 basketball. I'm Pete Souza in the studio. King McClure joining us. Look at that. Comfy from the living room, getting set to head to Tempe. King, what happens to a basketball player when the calendar turns to March?
Listen, you're ready. You are absolutely locked in. This is the moment that you dream of. You dream of March Madness in the backyard, shooting hoops, saying 3, 2, 1 for the national championship. This is the moment that all players are looking forward to. This is where it gets interesting, Pete.
Oh, it gets so interesting. And today we're going to break down the Big 12 men's tournament. Also, talk to ESPN women's bracketologist Charlie Cream. But first, let's take a look at the midweek scoreboard. The first game that jumps out to me, King, maybe not the most prolific matchup on the slate, but Arizona 113, Arizona State 100. That's a lot of points for this conference.
That's a whole lot of buckets, because when you look at that Kansas State-Cincinnati game, that is more of a score that we're typically used to seeing in the Big 12.
Yeah, I had an opportunity, too, to be on hand and call that Texas Tech-Colorado game. Texas Tech winning by 16 points. JT Toppin, 30 points and 14 rebounds. But the game we've got to talk about, maybe the game of the year, a double overtime thriller with Big 12 seeding implications. I'm talking about BYU and Iowa State. These two teams are vying for that 4th seed, King, and that 4th seed comes with a 2-game bye. What'd you make of this game? We see some of the highlights right here. It was intense.
Man, that's incredible to go into Ames, a hard place to play, one of the hardest places to play in the Big 12, and to get off to a lead, a 20-point lead at that, is one of the hardest things to do. Look at the block by Keita, an absolute elite-level defender. I mean, the way that those guys were poised, the way that they played, and then typically when you're up by big on the road and the team makes a comeback, your chances of winning that game and pulling off the road upset when a team is making their comeback with the home crowd behind them is extremely slim. However, BYU was extremely poised. They stayed cool. They kept their calm, and they pulled out the dub in double overtime. That just shows the maturity of this team. And Pete, the Cougars are dangerous. 7
straight wins, and you touched on it, man. And as a former player who's gone into Ames and played, you know what that's like. They were up 21, they get pushed into overtime, and somehow they find a way to win it in OT. But I want to ask you about Iowa State. There's a deficit underneath the basket for them right now. They were out-rebounded by BYU 52-24. What do you see Iowa State needing to do as we get into March here to get that thing back and running up to 100%?
You know, Pete, I don't want people to overreact to this, because now, granted, it's a little concerning about how bad they got beat down on the glass. I am a little concerned about that, but let's not overreact. And there's a few reasons why. Because, number one, I think there's still, when you look at the front court, when you look at Jackson, when you look at Chatfield, I mean, these guys are still solid bigs who can rebound, who can play with the best of them. And I think they had an off night. I think they had a down night in the rebounding category. Let's also remember, Pete, that next week when they go into Kansas City, they're going into Hilton South. There's a reason why it's called Hilton South. There's a reason why they play some of their best basketball in that tournament, in the Big 12 tournament. And that right there will carry them over to the NCAA tournament. So I still think this Iowa State team has a good chance to not only make a run in the Big 12 tournament, but in the NCAA tournament as well. So let's not overreact to Iowa State, losing at home, getting dominated on the glass. I think they're allowed to have one or two off nights, but they're still a really good team who has a chance to make a deep run.
Man, that's a great point. You go in there as an opposing fan into Kansas City. I think a lot of folks get surprised. They get swallowed up by the Cyclone faithful out there on the road. On Monday night, number 3, Houston, they took down Kansas 65-59. The Big 12 regular season champs, helped by L.J. Cryer and his 22 points. Not surprisingly, the Cougars defense forcing 20 turnovers. Houston has a few guys in the a few guys in the conversation for conference honors. But let's start with Coach Sampson, Big 12 Coach of the Year race. What are your thoughts on Kelvin Sampson being to win that hardware again this year?
I would say that he definitely is probably number one. And no disrespect to this man, because I think he is a phenomenal coach. He's done a tremendous job. But here's the thing, Pete. Everybody expected this from Houston. everybody expected them to finish top 2 in the conference. But you know who we didn't expect to finish top 2 in the conference? Is Grant McCasland and Texas Tech, those guys over there in Lubbock. We didn't expect them to do what they're doing. So for them to be able to rise to the top the way that they have, I mean, you have to consider Grant McCasland. And in my personal opinion, even though I played for the man, non-biased at all, my personal opinion is that Grant McCasland should win Coach of the Year because nobody had those expectations on Texas Tech. They exceeded expectations while Houston met expectations. Major difference.
Yeah, we saw, you and I had a game in Lubbock in December, and Coach McCasland told us right then and there, guard play is going to be huge if we want to make a deep run this season. And the guard play has stepped up, but that's an extension of him on the floor. And even his ability to find Darion Williams to become even more versatile, right? To be able to defer to JT Toppin when he has to Chance McMillan. Those guys are really, really good, and they come at you from so many different ways. But it starts with the education coming from Grant McCasland off the court.
And let's not forget what he did this offseason by going to get a guy like Jeff Linder, and how much that really helps him. I mean, I think that has elevated his coaching to a different level because one thing that we know is that he's a defensive-minded guy, but he's had to adapt because he hasn't had those level of defensive teams that he had when he was at North Texas. But offensively, with the help of Jeff Linder, Grant McCasland has turned into a guy that runs a lot of good offensive sets, and they're hard to beat because of the way that they spread it, the versatility that they play with, the spacing on the offensive side, to be able to go inside out and have a dude like JT Toppin who can get you a bucket at any moment. I mean, this team has been able to take it to new heights, primarily due to Grant McCasland and his ability to adapt as a coach.
Yeah, and you mentioned Jeff Linder was a head coach, right? And it's not too often you see head coaches take jobs as an assistant, but this obviously was the right fit and it's working out. And you mentioned JT Toppin, a tip of the cap to all the ballers from Dallas, right? King, yourself included. Way to go.
You know I got to show love to my Dallas brethren.
Hey, man, he hadn't made it too hard for you. I mean, the guy is playing out of his mind. I want to give you one quick second. We're short on time right now, but Kevin Young, I know you have feelings about him and the coaching job he's done in Provo.
Yeah, he's definitely an honorable mention in this category, and his name has to be brought up because nobody expected BYU to be as good as they are, and especially how they've been as of late. I mean, early on in the Big 12 play, they were a little up and down, had a few good wins, had a few bad losses, but now the consistency in which they're playing with the confidence that those guys are using or every single time they step on the court, I think that Kevin Young's name has to be mentioned in this category. Don't think he'll win it, but it's definitely, he's probably number 2. You know, 1A, 1B would be Sampson, McCasland, and number 2 would have to be Kevin Young. You have to at least have that conversation, bringing his name up because he definitely deserves that.
All right, we're going to keep the conversation rolling. We're going to take a quick break, but when we come back, the Phillips 66 Big 12 men's basketball tournament tips off next Tuesday. We're going to take a look at the bracket, how it stands today, and take a look at some of the games. Man, some interesting matchups already starting to shape up. That's next on Inside the 12. Welcome back to Inside the 12. Pete Souza in the studio. King McClure. Check him out in the living room as he gets set to head to Tempe for a big game this weekend, Texas Tech and Arizona State. But, man, I just can't resist talking about the Big 12 tournament. Phillips 66 Big 12 tournament tips off next Tuesday from T-Mobile Center in Kansas City. Limited tickets are still available, so make sure you get yours today. King and I talked in the first segment about Iowa State. You know those fans and the rabid fan bases are going to try to swallow up all those tickets as soon as they can. So get yours if you want to go. All right, here are the standings in the conference with one game to go. You see Texas Tech moving up Wednesday night with that big win over Colorado. Now, if everything were to stay chalk, let's take a look at how the Big 12 men's tournament bracket would look right now. Yes, we're talking about brackets. I'm excited. King's excited. When you look at this bracket, King, this is a pretty nice breakdown of what is to come. What jumps out at you?
Yeah, I mean, there's a few matchups that are very, very intriguing. And I kind of like that 12 and 13 matchup with Cincy and UCF. I mean, these are two teams, and one team in Cincinnati who, if they make a decent run in this tournament, they have a chance to potentially work their way back up to the NCAA tournament. So I think that Cincinnati, how they play, how focused they come, I think that'll be huge. That 9-16 Kansas State, Colorado, same thing for Kansas State. I think if you can make a run in this tournament, you win that first one, and now you have to play TCU in the second round. I mean, I like Kansas State's chances. So I think that those first two, the top two, are very intriguing because there's two teams. I mean, they're outside looking in, but they could work their way into the conversation with a few big wins.
Getting a bye in the Big 12 tournament, overrated or underrated?
I think it's underrated because I think that, winning 4 or 5 games, playing 4 or 5 games in 4 or 5 days is extremely hard and taxing on your body. And you have to go rest up, and if you make the NCAA tournament, you have to go prepare for next week. So I think that it's very underrated from a standpoint of if you need to fight your way in, this is a good way to get wins. So teams like Cincinnati, right? You go beat UCF. If you go beat Iowa State, now you have BYU. That's a chance to rack up 2 quad one wins to fight for a chance to get to the big dance because it means more to you, So I think that you have teams who are trying to fight their way in. You have teams who've already guaranteed a seeding. So therefore, it's a battle of two worlds.
Can we take that bracket one more time, guys? I want to take one more look. I want to get King's opinion here on who has the easiest path right now to go to the conference championship. Look at that bracket, King. What do you think? What's the softest way right now?
I mean, I was going to go Cincinnati, but that second round matchup against Iowa State is a little tough. But the only reason why I would take Cincinnati is because out of Houston, Tech, and Arizona, I would go BYU and that in the third round to be the easiest out of those 4, even though it's not an easy route. I would say that TCU would be the easiest out of those 4 games in the second day. However, that Houston matchup in the third round is going to be an issue and going to be a problem for almost anybody. So truth be told, I mean, West Virginia, if you can beat Arizona State, Kansas, you already beat Kansas once. It's going to be tough, though, because it's going to be, so we talk about Hilton South. It's going to be Allen South, too. Or maybe that's not, I don't know. I'm directionally challenged. Whatever.
Me neither.
All right. But also, then you play against Texas Tech. So out of those paths, I mean, I would have to say that West Virginia probably has the easiest path.
Okay, I'm going to give you my little dark horse here. It's not a dark horse. It's a big dark horse. I think Kansas State can really shake things up. I think Kansas State could end up beating TCU. You get by the first round, you end up against TCU. I look at that as almost 50-50, and then you have a shot at Houston. And if you can pull off that upset against a Houston team that really, like we've talked about, has kind of solidified their standing in the NCAA tournament, now all of a sudden we're talking about Jerome Tang again. I'm just saying, don't rule out the Wildcats. Also, Baylor is another team, I think, that's starting to get kind of hot right now, learning to play with that smaller lineup, and they still have something to prove.
Let's not forget that when you talk about the 3 biggest fan bases who show up to the Big 12 tournament, one is probably 1A, 1B, Kansas, Iowa State. Number 2 is Kansas State. So let's not forget, people, that Kansas State is not a far drive from Kansas City. So you're right. When they do play Houston, that's a road game for Houston. So let's not get it twisted, Pete. I do agree with you. I think that Kansas State could have a chance to beat Houston because it's a road game for Houston. I think that right there, that small little detail gives them a chance to win.
See that? I got the baller, King McClure, on my side. The guy, by the way, we were talking about defense earlier. The guy had 108 steals in his career, 33 in his senior year. Probably more steals than some of the dudes we talked about. All right, when we return, we're going to steal some more of your time, but you're going to like that. Charlie Cream is coming up, ESPN's women's basketball bracketology expert. He's going to give us some insight on the Big 12 and teams and their seedings in the NCAA tournament. That's next. Welcome back to Inside the 12. The Phillips 66 Big 12 Women's Tournament is underway this week, but the NCAA tournament just around the corner. Joining us right now to share his insights on how seeding looks for the Big 12, ESPN women's bracketologist Charlie Cream. Charlie, I know the ball's bouncing all over the place. Thank you so much. We know you're busy this time of year.
Oh, yes, very busy, but I could talk about this stuff with anybody all day long. Sometimes I just talk to strangers about it on the street. That's that much fun.
Well, let's go. We got a familiar face here, no strangers. We're going to start with your latest projections. Where do you have Big 12 teams standing right now heading into the big dance?
Well, let's see. I've got TCU as a 3 seed, Kansas State as a 4. So I have those two hosting first and second round games right now. Baylor is a 5, West Virginia is a 6, Utah and Oklahoma State as 7s, and Iowa State as a 10. That's the 7 teams we're looking at in the field right now. I have Arizona as my second team in the next 4 out. So the Wildcats still in the mix, certainly for a bit as well.
Charlie, you mentioned TCU. A lot of folks talking about the Horned Frogs. They've been at the top of the Big 12 standings all season long. Some have them as a favorite in this week's conference tournament. Did they have an argument for a 2 seed in the Big Dance?
I think they do if they get to the finals and LSU in the SEC does not get to the semifinals or loses badly in the semifinals, I think there's a pretty good argument. If TCU wins the whole thing and LSU gets to the semifinals but loses there, I think TCU would also have an argument. So it's a win as much as you can and kind of watch the scoreboard situation, specifically LSU for the Horned Frogs.
Now, you have Iowa State as one of the last 4 byes. Are they safe, or is there more work for them to be done?
I think they're safe. I think that win over Kansas State at the end of the regular season was enough to make Iowa State safe. The bubble this year really, really thin. There's not a lot of teams. I think, in fact, I think we're talking about Arizona is maybe the last team that can still make a move into the field. And they're my second team in the next 4 out, talking realistically here. So I think Iowa State has some padding based on that. Another win would certainly help. To keep them in a bye situation. They still, I think, would want to avoid the first 4. If they do lose right away in the Big 12 tournament, I could still see them having to play that extra game in the NCAA tournament, starting a couple days earlier than everybody else.
You know, I didn't get an A in geography, so I'm going to turn this over to you. A lot of folks in Big 12 country are curious as to where some of these top-ranked teams or higher-seeded teams could end up geographically. Any insight there on where some teams like Baylor, TCU, we've talked about Iowa State, where they could end up playing?
Well, it really is sort of a roll of the dice with where the committee ends up placing those top 4 seeds. So obviously if Kansas State and TCU end up in the top 16, they're going to be hosting those first and second round games. And then it's because they're not one of the top 2 seeds, it's really just a matter of where those first 2 lines of teams goes regionally. So you got Spokane, you got Birmingham as the 2 regions. Really, either team could go in either place. I think Baylor is a 5 seed. They're gonna end up with a 4 seed. So they could end up in, say, Chapel Hill. They won't end up in Manhattan playing Kansas State for sure, but they could end up in a place like Chapel Hill, Oxford, Mississippi, playing in the Ole Miss sub-regional. Perhaps Ohio State and Columbus, something like that.
All right, Charlie Cream, I know you're busy. We really appreciate you taking the time to drop some knowledge on us today. Best of luck. I know you got plenty of work ahead.
There's lots of work to do, lots of games still to watch. We love it, though.
We sure do. All right, man. Appreciate you, Charlie.
Take care.
All right, time for our final break. When we return, we look ahead to the final men's games of the regular season, and we have got some bonanzas here you've got to stick around for. More on Inside the 12 next. Welcome back to Inside the 12. I'm Pete Souza. We got King McClure just up the road in the living room getting set to head to Tempe. It is the most wonderful time of the year, the final weekend of the men's regular season, right before we all head off to the 2025 Phillips 66 Big 12 men's basketball tournament. That tips off on Tuesday, March 11th at the T-Mobile Center in Kansas City. Packed Saturday slate ahead. I'm talking about this Saturday. No shortage of exciting matchups here down the stretch. That means it's time for What to Watch, King McClure, presented by Children's Health. We're going to start off with number 10, Iowa State. They head to the Little Apple to take on Kansas State at 1:30 on CBS. Your projections, thoughts on this showdown?
Yeah, it's a sneaky game, and Iowa State needs to be careful because Kansas State has been playing better as of lately. That place will be rocking. And I think that Kansas State needs this one. They need this one. They need a few more in the Big 12 tournament. I think Kansas State will be hungrier. They'll be more motivated. And I think Kansas State can pull off this upset.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, I had a conversation with Wes Miller not too long ago, and he mentioned the Big 12 was one of those conferences where one loss can turn into 2 losses, and then 3 losses, and then 4 losses. It doesn't matter who you are. That's how competitive they are, or this conference is. So Iowa State needs to be wary of that. Number 24, Arizona, going to be on the road going to Allen Fieldhouse. That game is at 4:30 on ESPN. How does this one grab you?
You know, I like Kansas, and they played a lot more competitively than we've seen them play on the road against Houston. Houston didn't blow them away. They didn't. I mean, they played better. Houston did, but Kansas still played better than what they have played and what they have shown us in the previous weeks. And let's not get this twisted, people. Kansas has not had the season that they wanted to or that the fans expected them to. But this is still a Kansas team that do not be surprised if you see them in the Sweet 16 because they're still good. They still can figure it out, and you're talking about one of the best coaches probably in our game right now, in Bill Self. So do not be surprised if you see them in the Sweet 16. I like Kansas in this game.
All right, another team you might see in the Sweet 16, number 3, Houston. They're traveling to Waco to play Baylor. Not as much on the line for the Cougars as maybe you thought would be 2 weeks ago. The game starts at 9 o'clock local time in Central Texas, 10 o'clock Eastern time. I want to ask you as a player, what's it like on a Saturday when you're used to playing maybe 2 o'clock, 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock? We love it because TV, I get to watch everything. But for you as a player, is that hard having to wait all day to play at 9 o'clock at home?
Yeah, you hate it. I hated late games because it's just running through your mind. I mean, the anticipation, the excitement, you know this is a big game. You know this is prime time, ESPN, and all of a sudden I have to wait until 9. I'm out my rhythm. Typically, you're right. It's 2 o'clock, 4 o'clock, 6 o'clock. So we're not getting there till 7:30. That means we're not on the court stretching and getting loose until 8 o'clock. Yeah, it's a way different feeling. And that anticipation and excitement runs through you all day. Honestly, I used to not eat before games. I'm so ready. I'm not eating. I'm not putting anything in my body. And granted, they have to force me because you had to. But like the stomach, my stomach, the knots in my stomach that I would feel before the game, like just me wanting to go out there and play, I really couldn't eat. I could barely eat anything because I was just so amped and so ready to play. But, I mean, this will be a good one. This will be a good test for Baylor. They have the home crowd. They could potentially hand Houston their second loss.
All right, you got the knots in the stomach before you play the late game as a player. You're going to have butterflies next week because we're going to have you back in Kansas City for the Big 12 tournament. We are all going to have butterflies and be excited. That is all the time we have for today. For King McClure, I am Pete Souza. Have a great rest of the week. Enjoy the basketball. We'll be back next time.